Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta. Friday, April the 15th. I'm glad to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. Chat room is open, and I have a friend in the chat room already. And good morning to you. And, it was a short night for me, so hopefully I won't be mumbling and you can understand what I'm saying. So it's good to be here, though. I'm glad to be able to do these shows, and I appreciate everybody who's tuning in. I want to continue talking about unwantedness, unwantedness and child abuse. And mainly I was kind of looking for topics that were related to being unwanted, like children who might feel or be told that they were unwanted. There's not a whole lot out there, but mainly it falls under, the category of emotional abuse, neglect, psychological abuse, of a child, and even really sort of falls into the physical child abuse, really, when you think about emotional neglect or physical neglect and a child is not being wanted. And I also have another good friend in the chat room, Maisie. Hello, Maisie. How are you? And I'm glad that you guys can be here. I appreciate it. This is what I want to continue talking about. That last article that we were looking at, messengers2.com, was mainly talking about abortion and the difference between, the studies that they had done that concluded that whether a child was planned pregnancy or not, it didn't seem to matter because the children are still abused. And so in that study they found that whether a child was really wanted in the beginning of the pregnancy or whether they weren't, didn't seem to have any effect on whether the child would be abused or not, because many children who the parents said they did want their children abused them anyway. And so, that's mainly what that article was talking about. So we're pretty much done there. And, I'm glad. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it for you guys being here this early in the morning with me. That's what I want to talk about. I say this on every show because I think it's really important. I'm not a counselor or therapist, and I'm just a private citizen paying to do my shows. And I just wanted to be one more voice speaking out against child abuse, standing up for child rights and speaking out about and just talking about adult survivor issues. And mainly this show is just my healing journey. It's my healing journey. And so I appreciate everybody who's tuning into this show and here with me on this journey, right? So I thank everybody for your support. But, everybody has to listen at their own discretion because I'm talking about abuse, and abuse is a sensitive topic for most people if they haven't heard a whole lot about it. So I just ask everybody to listen at your own discretion, really. Ultimately, I'm talking about abuse and violence, and, I think everybody should listen at your own discretion. If you think the show might bother you, you have to turn it off. And young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my show. And the reason I say that is because I believe in protecting children at all times. And young people, I don't know how young the people are who are listening to my show. So if you're under the age of 18, just have an adult listen to the show with you, somebody you trust, who you know is trustworthy, who can, take a listen to one of my shows with you and see if it's something that's age appropriate for you, right? Because there's a lot of adult content on my shows, and it's all about stopping child abuse, but I just think that children should be protected at all times. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate that. So we'll get right into this article here. And I wanted the last part of that Messengers 2, unwantedness and child abuse, was mainly talking about abortion and whatnot. And really, I didn't want to necessarily go into that. But yesterday, I was just talking about the fact that, my mother didn't want any of her children. She didn't want us. We were not wanted. She made it very clear that we were not wanted, and in every way, through her speech, through her words, and through her actions. So, my dad was just a non-participating abuser in the home who would, be half of the responsibility of popping these kids out and then not want anything to do with them. So we were kind of on our own, except for bad, negative parenting, right? If our parents had anything to do with us, it was not going to be good, because there wasn't any normal or healthy interaction between my parents and my siblings and myself. And so anytime there was any interaction between us, it was somewhat unhealthy. So it wasn't good. And, I was mainly talking yesterday about the fact that, my mom was really didn't want these children, was pregnant all the time, and she aborted, like some of the children were born stillborn, and some of them were, I'm sure she had miscarriages along the way as well. But she was quite upset that she had carried these three babies. Like, she used to complain, she'd be like, well, I had these, three children that were born stillborn, but what she used to tell me was that she wished that I would have died with the stillborn babies. And the reason, I mean, she didn't say that one time. Like, she would say this to me on a regular basis, and that's because she was really trying to hurt me, you know what I mean? And she figured that would be one way to do it. And certainly it did, because I was thinking, how could you say that to me? I mean, I'm your child, I made it, I survived, which was a miracle because I came in like almost, 2.5 months early. It was, born premature and had to go into an incubator, and I weighed like under 3 pounds, and I was pretty sick when I was born. And she was too, because she was in a coma. And, I thought, well, I survived that, you know what I mean? I think that a parent would be happy that their child survived and made it into the world. But my mother was like telling me that I should have been dead with the other stillborn babies, and so that always had a bit of an effect on me. It's kind of like, oh, thanks a lot. And so I know lots of people out there who probably, not everyone, but some can relate to what I'm talking about. And so it's a harsh reality, right? It's a harsh reality for many people. And I think that, myself, I've always fought with that, because I've had to be worth something to myself, you know what I mean? And that's what really, that's the hard part. I had to learn how to do that, and so that's why, some people do, right? And people think, really? I mean, does this really happen to people? And it's like, absolutely. I mean, people have so much to overcome in their lifetimes, and especially when they're starting out as children and being made to feel unwanted or unloved, and, it's pretty harsh. I have a question in the chat room, and and was your mother abused, Laureate, when she was a child? Yeah, my mother was abused by her mother, and like my mom would talk a lot about her mother, my grandmother, and the treatment that she was dishing out to all the children, not just my mom. My mom was the oldest of 7 children, so there was she had 7 siblings as well, and she was the oldest, and my grandmother was an abusive woman who, this was back in the 1920s, 1930s. My grandmother was, she was just a horrible woman. They grew up on a farm, and the kids were mainly just farm hands. And my grandmother was physically abusing her children, as well as, verbally, emotionally, psychologically abusing her children. And I guess my mom said that her dad, my grandfather, was actually afraid of his wife, my grandmother. So he would hide, so in other words, he wouldn't protect the children. He would just be off on the farm working, or, he just totally was not there, to support the children, because I think he was afraid of his wife, my grandmother, right? And my grandmother was pretty horrific, she took in a bunch of orphans in the 1930s from this orphanage down the road, and it was just overcrowded, and so she took in, I think my mom said there might have been around 10 at any given time, orphans living on the farm with them. And my grandmother actually used to beat on these orphans, like horsewhip them, right? And that's what she was doing to all of her children. She was just a horrible woman. And she was horsewhipping her own kids too, not just the orphans. But she was beating on them all the time, and these kids actually took off. These orphans actually left. They ran away. They were like, we're not going to stay here. Like, my mother was like, where are you going? And they were like, we're just going down the road. We don't care. Like, we're not going to stay here and be beaten like dogs, you know what I mean? And then my grandmother, when my uncle was like about 17 years old, my grandmother horsewhipped him, and it made him sleep at a barn, and it was probably winter time, and he got pneumonia and he died. And so my grandmother was responsible for my uncle's death, and like I never obviously met him. Like, this was back in the 1930s, 1940s, right? So, yeah, my mom grew up abused, and but that's my big, beef really, is that my mother used to cry. She'd sit around, at night in the kitchen, feeling sorry for herself. I was abused as a child, and crying the blues. Here she was in this abusive marriage with my dad, who was abusing her, and she had all of these kids, and she didn't want these kids. And then she would go back to her own childhood, and she would be like, I was abused as a child, and my mother used to beat on me, and I took all the beatings for my siblings, and trying to, just feeling sorry for herself, and understandably so, but. And then she would beat on me, right? And I'd be like, well, how can you sit there and you can say abuse is wrong? You know what I mean? And that you should not have been treated that way, and that your own mother abused you, and then she would beat on me. So that's my whole issue, is that my mother was unable to see what she was doing was exactly the same thing that her mother was doing to her. And she didn't like it, so that's why I couldn't figure out why she would think it was okay to do that to her own children, right? So yeah, my grandmother was I don't know what was the matter with my grandmother. My mom used to sort of try to work it out in her mind what was wrong with her mother. He never could really figure it out because she had heard that from various family members that her mother had been kind of spoiled as a child. But she said she thinks that there may have been some abuse in there and probably sexual abuse. So she said, I don't know, if there was or not, because this would have been back in like the early 1900s. And so, pretty harsh. My mother, she was both my parents were only educated to like the 10th grade because they grew up in a farming community in Nova Scotia. Very rural back in the 1930s. Nobody was going to school, and you'd go to school, but you wouldn't finish normally. I mean, if you got to a certain grade, it'd be good enough. If you learned to read and write, that's fine. So both my parents did not, finish school. They were farming community in the 1930s, right? So, and the education levels back then were not, they weren't that concerned whether children finished school or not back in those days, especially in those rural areas. So, they were kind of, and their parents, who knows what kind of schooling my grandparents had. Yeah, pretty bizarre. Both my parents were born in the late 20s, and my dad was born in 1923, and my mom was born in 1927. Their parents were born right around the 1800s. So, I mean, the late 1800s, so 1890 to 1900. So, and their parents were born around 1850. So there's only like a couple of generations back to 1850, and that's the whole issue. There was no new information. My parents were going on information that these people had from like prehistoric times when children were supposed to be seen, and it was okay to abuse your children. It was okay to rape your wife. It was okay to do all this stuff, right? So it's kind of bizarre. Their behavior was very, very bizarre. But yeah, it's pretty sad. Yeah, see, that's the thing. A lot of it's a lack of education a lot of times, and I think that, but it doesn't matter because educated people abuse their children too, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean, that it doesn't really necessarily reflect, whether a parent will abuse their children or not. Educated people abuse their children too, so But yeah, it's just that it runs in cycles. I believe that it just runs in cycles, a cycle of abuse, and it's passed on generation to generation. My sister abused her two boys. Another one, my other sister didn't really. My other sister did a great job raising her daughter, I have to say, because she raised her pretty much on her own, and she did not abuse her, but she was kind of went the other way because growing up in the home that we did, one of my sisters actually was way too lenient on her daughter and allowed her daughter to do just whatever she wanted because she was just no, whatever her daughter wants she gets, right? So in one hand, she sort of went the opposite way. And one of my brothers actually abused his son and took a hammer to him and just wasn't treating him all that great. But my other siblings all didn't have any children, so there weren't very many grandchildren out of 7 children, right? There was only 3 naturally born grandchildren, and the other grandchild is by adoption, so from his wife, right? Because it's not really his child, it's just his wife's child. So, there was only 3 grandkids offspring coming from all 7 children, because three of my brothers are gone. They're like, 2 of them killed themselves and one died. One was murdered actually. So yeah, not very many kids, and but it's probably a good thing. And so yeah, it's absolutely horrific. Like it's horrific what this kind of stuff does to children. And I wanted to look at like types of emotional abuse. This particular website, this is a great website. And I know the lady that runs this website. She's awesome. She's a survivor of child abuse. This is her website. ChildAbuseEffects.com. www.childabuse-effects.com. Types of emotional abuse. So this is kind of where this falls into, being unwantedness and being told or shown that a child is not wanted, unwanted. It's a form of rejection, right? And there's many types of rejection. Physical rejection, emotional rejection, psychological rejection, verbal rejection. And I grew up rejected, let me tell you. Well, we were not, when my mother, by the time I came around, did not want any kids around her. Like I was the last of 7 and she was miserable, and so I would go to hug her and hold on to her dress, and she would like push me away and push me down and tell me to get away from her, and she never really wanted me to even try to be around her. And I was looking for that bond, from a very young child, but right around the time that I would have been starting to walk, and as a toddler, my parents were brought up on child abuse charges, right? And so I specifically remember the two people that would come into our home on a regular basis. There was a man and a woman, and they both used to carry clipboards, and they had suckers, and they would give me suckers, and then they'd check me out for signs of abuse, right? I had their little clipboards making their notes and stuff, and they would talk to my mom and stuff. And I remember this, and that's pretty young, but I can remember quite a bit actually, just because of growing up in that home, in that kind of chaos and dysfunction. I was kind of paying attention because I think it was just a form of trying to survive and staying alert. You know what I mean? So I was paying attention, and it was pretty scary. My parents were pretty harsh towards each other, and once they got busted on child abuse charges, they had to sort of straighten up for a couple of years while the social services and social workers were looking in on things. But once they were gone, the abuse just started again, and just kept on going, right? And then my parents moved us out of the country to Canada for a short period of time in the summer, when I was about 7 years old. And my dad sold the house out from underneath my mom, really, and for a van and a couple $1,000s, moved us up to Vancouver. And then my brother got in trouble for, I guess he had some pot and some marijuana on him. He got arrested at a park, and he wasn't that old. He was about 14 years old. And my dad freaked out and packed everything back up and grabbed all of us, and we all went back down to live in New Mexico, where we just left, right? With no money, no house, no nothing. So he basically sold out this house from underneath of us for a van, a couple $1,000s. Yeah, it was quite crazy and absolutely kind of dysfunctional. But this is the thing. My mom, there was really no support. She had no support, and she had all these children. I can see, I know when I take a long look at this, and I see maybe even with a third party look, with my own eyes, like a third party look looking in on it. I mean, I can see why she was the way she was, but there's no excuse. You cannot abuse your children just because you had too many, or it's like, oh, you were abused as a child, so then you think you have the excuse to feel sorry for yourself and abuse your own children. Or I don't condone what my parents did. And people have asked me before, like, did you ever forgive your parents, and like, have you forgiven your parents and stuff? And I say yes, I have, because I really wanted to not carry hatred in my heart, because for so many years I had hatred in my heart for them. I'm talking severe hatred. I used to tell them to their face that I hated them, because I really thought that I did. And then later on, I realized that no, I didn't hate my parents. I loved my parents, and I was looking for that love. I was looking to be nurtured, and I was looking for acceptance, and obviously wasn't never going to get. The truth of the whole thing came into my mind, and I was like, yeah, okay, well, I guess, I'm going to have to in order to not have hatred in my heart, I'm going to have to forgive them. But, I don't condone what they did at all, and I don't think abuse is condonable. I don't think we can condone abuse, and I think that people should be responsible for their behaviors, and people should take responsibility for their actions. And my mother, she was always trying to blame my dad for the abuse, saying it was his fault, and, oh, it was all your father, and he drove me crazy, and, it's his fault. He was abusing the children. Of course, she was brought up on charges too, because my older siblings actually in court told that my mother was abusing them too, and so she was also brought up on charges. And so she was always trying to make it look like my dad, and my dad would do the same thing. He'd be like, "Oh, it was all your crazy mother," and so neither one of them would take responsibility for their actions. But it's pretty harsh what people do, and I decided, I know there's so many people. I could have some interesting chats going on in the chat room here about hating and having to let go of it, and that's the whole issue, is because it was killing me, and I was going to kill myself. And I thought, man, if I continue to carry this hatred and this anger and rage and this self-loathing and this all this stuff around in my heart, and I do not get something done, I was in such a hell. I just really wanted out. And I was like, for me to be able to heal, I really had to, and to start my healing journey 4 years ago, I really had to make some decisions, and that was that I was going to take care of myself, and that I was not going to allow the abuse that I suffered destroy my life, and because I watched it destroy my family's life, so I wanted to change that, and I realized that I wanted to live, and I thought, wow, I need to heal, and I need to allow myself to heal. So at that point, I decided, that I should forgive my parents, and that I should, not carry that hatred and that rage, and work with my inner child to work with myself from so long ago, to get in touch with those feelings of how I was feeling as a child. And so many people do understand self-loathing, and especially people who've been abused. And if your parents, basically children are a reflection of their parents. And so if your parents are good to themselves and they're good to you, then you will pretty much be good to yourself, and you'll be good to you. That's how it's like a reflection, right? I mean, it's how you treat people. If you treat people well and good, they generally will treat you well too. I mean, not always, obviously, but I'm just saying, like, especially parents and kids, right? Because children are like little sponges, and basically they're getting their needs met by whoever's around them when they're young, and they're learning from whoever they're around. So if a parent is saying, "I hate you," and pushing them away, the child takes a good long look at themselves and says, "Wow, I must hate myself too. I'm going to have to push myself away," right? Because if you're ugly, if the parent considers you to be ugly and not worth anything, and tells you they hate you, and children hear that enough, they believe that it must be true. And, it depends on how long this type of stuff goes on, but children who grow up around this stuff, it's pretty harsh, right? And so, we basically are the mirrored reflection of our parents, coming out of having been raised by certain people, whoever the caregiver was, or whoever the people were that raised us. We're just kind of a reflection of them. And so, I had to learn how to change all that, and how to learn to love myself, and how to want to stick around and want to live, right? And and for my inner child too, because mainly I could always hold jobs down. I mean, most people would think I was doing pretty good, but it was inside. I was just crumbling. I was just crushed. And so I thought, man, I'm going to have to get in touch with what's going on inside, way deep down inside of myself, and figure this out, and allow myself to heal and get in touch with that inner child, that one, the one who's in pain still, you know what I mean, and is wounded, right? And no one has really come to her aid. And so that's what I've been doing over the last 4 years, is working through this stuff and allowing myself to go back to the place I was when I was a child, and get in touch with that part of me that's still there, and allow myself to work through some of this stuff, right? So it's hard, but it can be done. And I think that people, as long as you get some help somewhere, whether it's self-help, whatever it is, everybody's different. We all need different things, but I would say just to make sure that you do reach out, you know what I mean, and get some help, some way, somehow. That's nice. Oh, thanks, Maisie. Yeah, that's, well, I don't know how cute I was, but I just wanted people to see that, I was trying as a child to be a normal kid, you know what I mean, even amongst living in that dysfunction and living in that mess. Part of me when I was a young kid was still trying to maintain a sense of a curiousness about the world, a sense of light, you know what I mean? And I think behind some of those pictures, I wanted people to know, if you look very carefully at a few of them, I'm actually crying in those pictures. I didn't want to take the photos. A few of them I had just been beaten beforehand. There was a couple there that you could see. There was a lot of fear in some of my early pictures. That if you actually take the smile away and you just look in my eyes, you can see I was going through a lot of internal problems, internal fear, and just because of the dysfunction and the problems that were going on in the home, because it was like a daily minefield in our home. We were being physically abused as well as verbally abused, emotionally, psychologically abused, and at the age of 8 I was being sexually abused. And so if you take a look at those pictures, you can see my face actually changes over the course of time. And that's why I posted those pictures, because I don't have very many pictures of myself, and nobody was taking pictures of me. So those are my school photos. And my family didn't take very many photos because obviously we were not a real family. Nobody cared about, we weren't all sitting around getting family photos, And the odd picture was taken by my sister, who had a camera because she was 5 years older than me. And so in other words, when I was 8, she was 13. She started working when she was real young. and she got a little camera and she would take pictures and stuff. And she was the only one that was doing that. So, I wanted people to see those pictures because if you look at the progression of the years that go by, it gets worse and worse. Like my face, actually, I actually began to lose. I began to lose a sense of, any kind of happiness and joy in my life especially by the time I hit like 12, 13 years old, and that's just mainly because I had come through so much abuse and, from my parents and one of my siblings, and I started to really hate life. I was hating life. By the time I was 10, I thought I was dead. I was just like, I'm dead. You may as well just kill me. All right, go ahead and just take my life. Just end it because I'm tired. I was so sick and tired of being abused and I was just tired. We were not sleeping. Our lives were being threatened on a regular basis by both of our parents. I was being sexually abused by a sibling that my mother knew about and didn't do anything about it. And, I was just so tired by the time I was 10, 11 years old that I wanted out, and you can see some of the photos as the progression goes on that it just gets worse. And I have a few photos after that kind of show just my own self-destruction, you know what I mean, from drug use and not taking care of myself, not sleeping. And we weren't sleeping in our home just because of the dysfunction and my parents fighting at night, and trying to keep my dad away from my mother was a big issue. I really never slept that well all the way through my childhood, and my dad was always quite often saying that he would kill the family when we were sleeping, especially when I was really little. And so, we didn't sleep very well. So I was really tired by the time I was about 10, 11 years old. So what I wanted those pictures to be public information so that years down the road, if somebody wanted to take a look at that as far as child abuse effects and whatnot, when they study pictures, they can go in and they can get really close into a photo and they can detect abuse. And there were lots of those photos. I know what the situation was, so I know where, like, my mother had slapped me around or had, split my lip or whatever. Some of those photos you can actually see it. And I want people to know, you know what I mean? Like, my little inner child wanted to be seen and wanted to be heard. That's why I put those photos there. It's so incredibly harsh. And, well, thanks, Maisie. Well, I think what it is I've allowed myself, this has taken me, well, obviously, I mean, I'm nearly 46 years old. It's taken me a long time to get where I am today. And, I mean, up until the age of 21, 22, 21 really is when I stopped doing drugs. I started to really work on myself and straighten my life around. And it's taken me a long time, over a period of 20-odd years to obviously get where I am today. But I've been able to take a third-party look at all this and try to work through some of the emotions. So I think that was kind of the best way to do it for me, so that the emotional part wouldn't continue to destroy me. And I think that's where I've been able to see the whole picture. And I think some people, you have to almost take yourself outside of the situation in order to see what happened to yourself and to your family and whatnot. And so, I've been able to do that. But I think it was just mainly from being in shock from having two of my siblings kill themselves and knowing what was going on behind the scenes and knowing that what they suffered in the home. I mean, I was witness to it. I witnessed my dad abusing them and beating on them, calling them names, treating them horrifically, and my mother standing by and doing absolutely nothing about it. And my mother was abusing them too. I mean, my mother was almost 6 feet tall, and like she could take on my 6 feet tall brothers. You know what I mean? Like my mom used to outweigh all of us, by a lot. She almost weighed like about 280 pounds, and she was almost 6 feet tall. And that my dad was over 6 feet, and he was a big guy. And of course, when they were fighting, it was pretty heavy duty. You had to kind of, you had to be careful because they were really strong, and they could kill you if they wanted to. If they could kill each other if they wanted to. It was absolutely horrific. But yeah, just watching this and witnessing all this, and then knowing the reality of what it did to my family really allowed me to be kind of sober and headed about it as an adult. But when I was younger, I wasn't, and that's the whole issue. I had a lot of problems with anger and violence and self-destruction. Basically, I was just destroying myself. I thought, well, if my parents are going to try to destroy me, I'll just finish the job for them, right? That was my mentality as a child, right? So I'm glad I've been able to sort of work through this stuff through a period of years and through time. It has taken me a long time. I really wish I would have got some help with it a long time ago. But thanks everybody for being here. Yeah, I really appreciate it. You guys, thanks so much for being here with me this morning. Tonight I'm actually going to do a reading from my book. It's an hour-long show, and I'm actually going to read the first chapter of my book and see how far we get. My chapters are pretty short, but I hope everybody will tune in. It's my story. It is graphic, however, it's not for children, and I will be reading it out, so there's a lot of curse words in there, and it's very, very graphic in detail and abuse and whatnot. So, but I had requested from someone that I read some of my book on my show, and so I thought I'd do that tonight. So I'll be doing that tonight at 10 o'clock p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So thanks for being here, everybody. If you're having problems and issues and you don't have anybody to talk to and there's just nobody around, then make sure that you get some help. You reach out to somebody. I don't care. If you can't reach a friend or you don't have anybody to talk to, you make sure you phone a crisis line. But you stick around. You certainly do, absolutely do deserve to have a good life. But, man, I'm telling you, it's really up to us because nobody can do it for us. We have to take the first step and reach out. So many times people have been abused and they don't reach out and nobody even knows, right? So you're suffering by yourself and suffering all alone, and it's a horrible place to be. There are lots and lots of places to get some help, So be sure and, do take care of yourself, right? And if you have to, call a crisis line, like I said, then you make sure you do that. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. We'll talk to you later. I'll be back on tonight, like I was saying, and I'm also on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio. So have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.